We started Father Michael's lecture series in 2006. And at that time, we said we would do it for 3 consecutive years. And here we are on the 16th year of his lecture series. And what a fantastic tribute to the man himself. So I'm really delighted to be a co-facilitator or a co-moderator for this event. My name is Nicola Brennan, and I'm currently Ireland's ambassador to Ethiopia, South Sudan, and Dijbouti, hence joining from ADIS. And I'm co-moderating today with my good friend, Nadine Ferris France, who's the Executive Director of the Irish Global Health Network. And this series was started, as I said, in 2006 in recognition of the amazing work of Father Michael Kelly in addressing HIV. And unfortunately, as many of you know, Michael passed away in January of this year. So this is the first time we've had a lecture without dearest Michael's physical presence. But I know that he is here with us in deep spirit. And his legacy lives on in all of the lives he has touched. And I know he's touched so many as he did mine. And I'm sure everybody who's joining us virtually today. His legacy lives on in his work and in his fantastic words through this lecture series and through many books that he has written and many articles that he has authored. So he is here, his work continues, and I know that we will really enjoy today. So it's my pleasure to introduce today's lecture. It's focusing on ending stigma and discrimination. And that is the theme that we took in 2006. And it was one of the first times that I worked very closely with my co-moderator, Nadine. And since then, we've continued to work, and inspired by Michael, we worked with him over many years until his passing earlier this year. So we have a great lineup of speakers, really fantastic people who are joining us from around the world and are going to share their experiences, their analysis and their thoughts with us today. So we're set for 2 hours of really, really good engagement. So before we start off, I'm just going to hand over to Nadine to also give a few words of introduction. So over to you, Nadine.
Thank you, Nicola, and welcome everybody. And we just wanted to start by saying that Dill, who normally moderates this event, Dill Wickeramishing, she unfortunately can't be with us today because her mum passed away earlier this week. So I just wanted to take a moment for all of us just to send her love and let her know that we're thinking about her as she actually holds the service and supports the service for her mum, which is taking place in Sri Lanka right at this time. So just wanted to also welcome, before we get into proceedings, we wanted to welcome Father Michael's family who are always present at this event. We want to welcome Darina and Michael and his many nieces and nephews, his grandnieces and grandnephews and their families. Today's event is a combination of both shining a light on stigma and discrimination, which was an issue so close to Michael's heart, and also an opportunity for us to celebrate Father Michael's life. So before we begin, just a few points to be aware of. We're recording this event and it will be available afterwards on the Father Michael Kelly Zambia.ie website. We are live streaming the website right now onto YouTube on the Irish Global Health Network channel. If you have any questions during the event, please use the question and answers feature, and Nicola and I will do our best to direct those questions to the amazing speakers that we have joining us today. And lastly, we encourage you to share messages from this event on Twitter and other social media platforms, and the hashtags are there for you in the chat function. So Nicola, handing it back to you so we can hear from our speakers.
Thanks, Nadine, and a really lovely introduction there. I'm not sure if the Minister is ready to join, so just while we're waiting for him, I'll just call out some of the places that people are joining from. So, and some previous speakers on this lecture series, including Sean Mellors from the UK, and we have colleagues from Zambia. You know, Zambia was incredibly dear. That's where Michael lived. He was a Zambian citizen, and where Michael's remains stay in Zambia. So it's wonderful to have people joining from Zambia. I see there are people here too from Belgium and of course from Ireland. Lots of people from Ireland who would have known Father Michael, who would have participated in his lectures. Really, really fantastic. And I see also somebody joining from Botswana, so joining our Professor Sheila Tlou from Botswana, so really fantastic. And as Nadine said, all his family as well. So as we're waiting for Minister Colin Brophy, I'm not sure if somebody could check whether he's available to join us. I'd like to introduce the Minister. Minister Colin Brophy is our Minister of State for Overseas Development Aid and the Diaspora. And Minister Brophy was appointed in July 2020. And I'm just hearing that he's not here yet. So I'm not sure, Nadine, would it be possible to move to the tribute video and then we'll come back in with
Absolutely. Oh, there's the Minister. Okay, Nicola.
Okay, Minister, welcome. It's lovely to see you. Yes, welcome.
Thank you, and apologies for running slightly late.
That's quite all right. You're literally on time, right on the button.
Oh, well, so, there you go.
Yes, the Minister is just about to introduce you. I'm Nicola Brennan. I'm Ireland's ambassador in Ethiopia, and wonderful to meet virtually across the miles. And I was just saying that you are our Minister of State for Overseas Development Aid and Diaspora, and appointed in July 2020. And since then, you've been an incredibly strong advocate for all of the work of Irish Aid, and indeed all of the partners that we work with through the UN and civil society. And just to let participants know that in October of this year, you travelled to Rwanda and Uganda. And in particular, you went to one of the poorest regions in Uganda, which is in Karamoja. And there, Irish Aid has been very involved in investing in girls' education. And I just wanted to make the link across with Father Michael, because Father Michael, in his words, he said that education is the social vaccine that can combat AIDS, and particularly for girls. So girls' education, hugely, hugely important. So with that in mind and that connection, Minister, I hand over to you for your opening remarks. And thank you so much for joining us.
Well, Ambassador, thank you very much. And just before I start, just to acknowledge the incredible work which you're doing, and in very difficult circumstances. And it really is appreciated, I know, by so many people, you and your team there at the moment. So I'm delighted to have this opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, to welcome you to the 16th annual Professor Father Michael Kelly Lecture on HIV and AIDS. I know that's now a tradition marking World AIDS Day. This year's lecture is, I think, particularly special, if tinged with sadness. Obviously, Father Michael left us last January, richer for having known him and poor for his passing. So today we honour that contribution to changing how we think and how we act in the face of a virus, HIV. But this was one of the most outstanding achievements, I think, in a life that was very well lived. The great writer C.S. Lewis must have had people, I believe, like Father Michael in mind when he said, "You are never too old to set another goal or to dream another dream." So each year, when Father Michael spoke to us at this event, he set us a new goal and expanded the boundaries of our thinking. And today, let's challenge ourselves to set new goals and to dream another dream, to keep up that fight against HIV. I think it is particularly important in the context of the world which we're now living in, and that concentration on that other great virus, which is now affecting us so much in terms of COVID, that we obviously remember to keep up the existing fight against HIV. So I'd like to in particular acknowledge the presence of Father Michael's family today as we honour his life and work. Father Michael's understanding and empathy and respect for those affected by HIV and AIDS was, and I believe remains, inspirational. So was his work to promote education and social justice. It was fitting that Father Michael was honoured by Ireland, receiving the Presidential Distinguished Service Award for the Irish Abroad in 2012. And I actually attended this year's event last night, and it's a very wonderful award that we have. And through his insurance last year by Umpus of the Father Michael Kelly stamp, also immense contribution to the people of Zambia was celebrated also in 2018 when Father Michael received that country's Order of Distinguished Service Award. It was, of course, in recognition of his transformative work that the Department of Foreign Affairs established this annual lecture series back in 2006. So looking ahead, I hope that these lectures can keep alive the legacy merited by his actions in life, or as he put it himself in his 2015 lecture, the hopes for 2030 will not materialize unless the world continues to take account of the disease and continues to keep it high on national and international agendas. So let us continue to set goals and dream, Father Michael's dream, so that we can meet the challenge of the Sustainable Development Goals to end the epidemic of HIV and AIDS by 2030. Now, I'm conscious that the UNAIDS has a particularly important role to play if we are to achieve this target. I'm looking forward to hearing from the Executive Director on her plans. Today, I'm delighted to announce that the government will be providing an additional 1 million in funding, bringing that total for 2021 to 3.4 million euros. During this most challenging of times, the additional funding will help them to continue their vital work to fight stigma and discrimination, as well as provide services for key populations. As we reflect, though, today on HIV and AIDS, I'm really conscious that around us, as I mentioned earlier, there is this other pandemic. And COVID-19, like HIV/AIDS, asks questions of our global health systems. I think it's amazing in how it has exposed the fragility of health systems, even in developed countries. It has revealed, though, and this is something I believe absolutely crucial importance, the interconnection between our good health as individuals and our collective health and welfare. It's reminded us how essential good health services are to healthy economies and to healthy perspectives on the future. The COVID-19 pandemic reminds us of the power of science to help us address, contain, and defeat disease. Science that has helped us and will continue to help us meet our 2030 goal, I believe, for eliminating HIV/AIDS. We're also, though, reminded of the importance of engaging with hearts and minds. And it's really important ensuring that we bring people with us on the journey. That knowledge that science works, education works, healthcare works, modest changes in behavior can really help save our lives. And it's something all of us are grappling with on a day-to-day basis in relation to obviously tackling and living with the COVID pandemic. But it's important to remember that every death by AIDS today is actually avoidable. But someone dies from AIDS every 60 seconds. So we must work to ensure that our efforts to combat COVID-19 are complementary and reinforce our efforts of achieving our 2030 goal for AIDS and HIV. And strengthening health systems and combating stigmas and misinformation is all part of that. So in this context, I'm particularly conscious on the strain on frontline healthcare workers. It informed my initiative with the HSE to help support the mental well-being of frontline healthcare workers in some of our partner countries through this very difficult time. Ireland's commitment to ending HIV and AIDS is a long-standing one. It's deeply rooted in our collective understanding of the relationship between poverty and poor health. Ireland appreciates the urgency with which we must tear down the barriers to HIV prevention services. We must grapple with those socioeconomic, legal, and cultural factors that stall our progress. Importantly, though, Ireland's approach is born out of empathy, especially for those most stigmatized and also at risk. At present, Ireland holds a board seat on the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria. That gives us an influential voice in the global health dialogue. So we're using it to advocate for stronger systems, health systems, for human rights and for gender equality. We are encouraging the sharing of lessons learned on HIV/AIDS as we deal with this pandemic. Focused on a more compassionate future, we must commit to building back stronger, more sustainable, and more open public health systems. It's essential that together we challenge the inequalities that are driving new HIV infections. We know that rates of infections are unacceptably high among key populations, from transgender people and men who have sex with men to sex workers and prisoners. The provision of sexual health services, therefore, is key to transforming women's health outcome and realizing their sexual and reproductive rights. This particularly is the case in sub-Saharan Africa, where women and girls accounted for 63% of all new HIV infections in 2020. We must work to encourage women and girls to come forward and access these services, especially given the constraints that COVID-19 has obviously created. Those on the margins of society have suffered immensely over the last 2 years. HIV testing services have remained closed during lockdowns, as have mental health services in many, many countries. However, we must also take the opportunity to celebrate, though, I believe, the resilience of those who continue to keep services open throughout, from the frontline workers to community organizations. And I've had an opportunity to meet so many of those frontline workers and community organizations, and it really is amazing the dedication and work which they carry out in some of the most difficult circumstances. We must continue also to be ruthless in addressing stigma and discrimination, which we know are on the rise. Some key populations have even been unjustly blamed for the transmitting of COVID-19. Funding to innovation is key. Our long-standing partnership with the International Partnership for Micromeasures has helped deliver such innovation in treatment and prevention. The approval and rollout of Deprivine was a breakthrough moment. It delivers a cost-effective, women-centered prevention method, and it's a real game changer for vulnerable women. I'm also encouraged by the recent breakthroughs in the treatment of AIDS with the antiviral jabs that can be taken months apart, which really does improve quality of life for patients. Support to education awareness is also key. Our support to frontline AIDS has helped adolescents and young people living with HIV to gain access to treatment, to vital sexual reproductive health services, and to psychosocial support. I'm also proud of our support to UNESCO's O3 program, the biggest comprehensive sexual equality education program in Africa. We are firm in our belief that education is the greatest tool against stigma and discrimination. Young people need access to knowledge and information to protect themselves from HIV, especially young women. So I will conclude by sharing the words of Father Michael once again. Education is the social vaccine that can combat AIDS. Before I hand back to our excellent moderators, Nadine and Nicola, I would like to extend my sincere thanks and appreciation to the Irish Global Health Network for facilitating this year's event, and to our incredible speakers that we will also hear from today. It has been a privilege to be with you today of what promises to be a wonderful legacy to Father Michael. So thank you very much.
Minister Brophy, thank you very much for your excellent opening remarks. I think you've really set the tone and the platform for our deliberations today, touching on many areas of real importance to Father Michael over many years of his work. And I think I'm just going to call out on one, and that is the importance of keeping HIV high on the national and international agenda. And it's so encouraging to hear you talk about Ireland's continued role in maintaining a very strong spotlight on addressing HIV internationally, and the continued support that the Irish government gives to many organisations to do that. And I know Michael would be incredibly proud to hear the words and to see your leadership in this space. And you know, your I suppose that the convergence of two global pandemics right now, and the importance of looking at issues of inequality of health systems, they're all areas that he spoke on and advocated for over very many years. So thank you very much. Really, really appreciate it. And I hope you can continue to join us for further discussions and listen to our panel speakers. But before we go to our keynote speaker, I will hand back to Nadine, who's going to introduce the video. Thanks, Nadine.
Thank you, Nicola, and thank you, Minister Brophy. And I just really heard what you said about it's never too late to set goals and dreams. And in preparing for this and some of the legacy around Father Michael, I realized that Father Michael, he started engaging in HIV and AIDS when he was nearly 67 years old. He had worked on poverty and education and all of these other issues. And he was 67 when he really looked at HIV and thought, yes, I'm going to do something about that. that. And, you know, wow, what has he done since then? Incredible. So never too late. So just moving on to a video. In order to pay tribute to Father Michael and his 15 years of lectures on HIV and AIDS, some of the former speakers from the lecture series sent in short videos, and we're delighted to share that with you today. We asked those individuals a couple of questions. Why is HIV-related stigma still an issue today, and what can we do about it? We also asked them, what have you learned about stigma and discrimination from Father Michael himself? So here's what they said.
And there is reason for concern. We need to be concerned that the AIDS epidemic is far from being over. We need to be concerned that prejudice, stigma, and discrimination still affront the dignity and humanity of millions of people worldwide.
Where silence reigns, trauma thrives, and this is certainly true when we're talking about HIV today. Because we stopped talking for decades about HIV, because we didn't educate a generation, the legacy of the AIDS crisis is still dumped on those who are just recently diagnosed with HIV today. But how we overcome this is through the power of the personalized story. By platforming our voices, we get to change hearts and minds. We get to educate a nation. We get to show the humanity behind all the amazing people living with HIV. But we need to invest in people living with HIV to get those leaders that we need. I will always be grateful to Father Michael Kelly for reminding me to remain humble, to be compassionate to all those around me, and just to see the humanity in all those around me.
The one thing I learned from Father Michael is to live a stigmaless life. Live and love a positive life, because this is who I am. I am not going to change. I am living a positive life. The other way is to also support the other young people living with HIV to overcome stigma. And this can only be done if I come together with other advocates to advocate against stigma among people living with HIV. And this will help us to keep Father Michael's legacy of ending stigma among people living with HIV in our communities and in the world.
I think HIV stigma is still an issue for people living with HIV, as the widespread information dissemination about treatment outcomes are still lacking. There is something that we can do about this. Bring your valuable knowledge into conversations and spaces wherever possible where you think people may not be in the know. Perhaps you could put them in touch with the wonderful podcast, Pause Vibes. Because if there's one thing I've learned from Professor Father Michael Kelly himself, is that we all have an obligation to ensure that HIV stigma is no longer a part of the experience for people living with HIV.
Stigma remains one of the biggest barriers to living positively with HIV. It comes in many forms and it exists in every country that I've ever lived or worked in. When I first had a conversation with Father Michael about stigma, he was really clear. No one should be stigmatized because of their HIV status. It saddened him greatly to know that people living with HIV were being stigmatized in the healthcare system, in their communities, and even in their families. We also discussed self-stigma and the reality that it's possible to live with HIV, but for many, it's not possible to live with the self-stigma and shame. Self-stigma eats away at a person, making them think that they're less than, that they're not worthy of love or life-saving medication, or in some cases of actually living. Father Michael was clear, stigma and self-stigma kill, and that we can do something about it. We can do something about it by speaking out, by supporting people living with HIV however we can. And for self-stigma, we can invest in programs that tackle deep-rooted self-judgments and belief that support a person to move from self-stigma to self-worth. We can understand that all of us have a role to play in stopping the stigma, and that it starts by not stigmatizing ourselves. Michael was an incredible friend and mentor. And when I think of him, I think of dignity, I think of humility, of empathy, of evidence, of equity, and women's vulnerability and power. But most of all, I think of love. Something Michael taught me is to be part of the movement to spread love and solidarity and not stigma and fear.
There is still so much stigma towards people living with HIV and towards HIV because people still treat HIV as this unspoken subject that no one should be speaking about and we should just be sweeping it under the carpet. I think that the reason there's still so much stigma has to do with our own denial with regards to how HIV is and how people living with HIV are supposed to live like. And what I've learned from Father Michael Kelly about HIV and HIV stigma is that there's no reason for us to stigmatize people for living with HIV. We have to come together, love each other, and accept that HIV is here. There are people who are living with HIV, and we should just come together, love each other, and just unite. And that is how we will win this fight against HIV.
Stigma has been with us forever, and it will continue to be with us for a very long time. However, HIV-related stigma does not have to be. If we learn to accept, think through our own prejudices, and learn to understand people for who and what they are. Father Michael Kelly espoused all those values and principles.
HIV-related stigma is still an issue because there is ignorance. There is a lot of ignorance about HIV, there's a lack of information. People don't know how you contract HIV or misinformation. There's also prejudice towards people who are living with HIV. Father Michael was an extremely compassionate person. He came across as quite non-judgmental. And I think that a society where we can listen to one another and engage in dialogue and not judge and have care and compassion for one another. That's what I'm taking from Father Michael.
Father Kelly's work underscored our collective duty to help people achieve healthy lives, regardless of their HIV status or their life circumstances. HIV-related stigma prevents people from accessing health facilities for HIV testing, care, treatment, and certainly for prevention. Father Kelly also worked tirelessly to reduce gender inequities, reduce gender-based discrimination and gender-based violence, and to help everyone have an equal footing.
One of the most important things I have learned about stigma from our dearest Father Michael is about the participation of women. As many of you know, Michael was a true feminist, an advocate for the rights of women and girls. He saw stigma and discrimination as a social epidemic that grinds people down in shame, isolation and rejection. In his first lecture in 2006, Michael said, and I quote, that we will never be successful in responding to the AIDS epidemic until we take robust, sustained and specific action to reduce and ultimately eliminate the prejudice, discrimination and unjust treatment that women experience. Without a frontal attack on the injustice of gender inequality, the dominance of the epidemic will continue and the spectre of stigma will remain. Every step that is taken to raise the status of women and to recognise their equal status with men is a step against the epidemic and a step against stigma. He went on to say that if we want to see an end to stigma and discrimination, we need to involve the participation of women. We need to cut out the exploitation of women. We need to reject attitudes and practices that offend against the dignity of women. And above all, we need to listen courageously and carefully to the experience of women and hear what they are saying about this epidemic and the stigma that goes with it. In gratitude for all that Michael taught me over many years of deep friendship, his memory lives on in his kindness, his powerful words and his enduring spirit.
Thank you for all your teachings. Thank you for teaching us that we shouldn't be pointing fingers, we shouldn't stigmatize others, but we should be very empathetic. With that said, I want to say, I'm an inspiration, bringing education on gender equalization. So much sensation, feel their vibration, singing peace to the nation. I bring life to this earth, recognize my worth. Goba mina gili kawe. Tomorrow is for my children, the future we can change, the world we will rearrange. I am courage, passion, efficiency. I'm a woman, well-organized man. I'm so different, but equal. With a meticulous plan, let me show you who I am. I'm a woman.
Wow. Well, you know, if Father Michael was here and listening to Yvonne Chaka Chaka, he would be on the floor dancing just like he was when Yvonne was with us for his lecture some years ago. So thank you, everybody. Just listening to all of those words just shows us how alive Michael is in all of us. So thank you to everybody. Nicola, back to you.
Thanks, Nadine, and wonderful to see all those tributes to Michael, and indeed the very beginning to hear his voice really brought him into the room. So thank you, everybody. It was really lovely tribute. Listen, we'll move on now and we'll go to our keynote speaker. So I'm really delighted to introduce and really honoured to have the Executive Director of UNAIDS and Under Secretary General of the United Nations, Winnie Byanyima. Winnie, I met you years and years ago when I was working in Uganda and have followed your work closely over many years. You're a passionate and long-standing champion of social justice and gender equality. So we're really pleased to have you with us here today. So listen, I'll hand over to you. A big welcome. I'll hand over to you. Thanks a million.
Thank you, Nicole and Nadine. It's such a great honor to be invited to speak, to give a lecture in memory of Father Kelly. My dear friends at the Irish Aid and Irish Global Health Network, thank you again for inviting me. I also thank the Right Honorable Minister of State for Overseas Development and Diaspora, Prof, for prioritizing his time and participating in this event, and your words were powerful. UNAIDS has always enjoyed a strong relationship with the government and the people of Ireland. Ireland's political and funding support has made the country a strong and reliable partner of UNAIDS. Such support allows us to lead the global effort to end AIDS by ensuring that communities of people living with HIV and those affected by HIV receive the services they need, especially those communities that are most left behind, like the communities in Karamoja that you mentioned. And so we're so grateful for the additional resources that the minister has just announced that will go a long way to keep services going. Of course, I'm also personally so happy to be at this event because, as I always tell you, I am an Irish girl through and through, educated by Irish nuns from my first day at school up to the day I left university. So I connect and I love Ireland. So thank you for bringing me into your event. Friends, this year marks 40 years since the first cases of AIDS were reported. We are marking 40 years, and 25 years since the establishment of the Joint Program on AIDS, which I lead. Global solidarity exhibited by friends like the government and people of Ireland, the scientific community, by communities on the ground with their resilience, saved millions of lives. Today, we talk about nearly 30 million people on treatment. That's about 3/4 of all the people living with HIV today are living good lives. That's huge achievement. Our partnership continues to render support to communities in sub-Saharan Africa that are most at risk and most left behind. From HIV prevention services in the Karamoja region in Uganda, where you are working very hard, and to support HIV, anti-stigma and discrimination, sexual and reproductive health and rights in Tanzania and beyond. This is really hard work, but such important work. Of course, I thank the moderators and the guest speakers who are going to enrich this conversation that will have a focus on HIV, stigma, and discrimination. It's a huge honor to be asked to deliver the keynote. And I would like to recognize Professor Father Michael Kelly, who sadly passed on earlier this year, for his enormous contribution to the HIV response in Zambia and other parts of sub-Saharan Africa. We see what the leadership of an individual, the difference that it can make. We recognize and we remember his advocacy for HIV prevention and human rights so that those most at risk of HIV could access services they needed to stay healthy. I feel that Father Kelly's 5 decades of work exemplify Ireland's commitment to improve the health and education of vulnerable communities in post-colonial sub-Saharan Africa. He rightly believed in the notion of education as the social vaccine that can combat AIDS. I think that term was a very smart one. I heard you use it. We will also remember Father Kelly's words during his lecture to mark 2020 World AIDS Day for urging the world to show massive solidarity with all actors in their struggle against HIV at a time when its impact was being worsened by COVID-19, climate change, and environmental degradation, and indeed at a time when global solidarity was at its weakest. Now we are at 2021 World AIDS Day. As we commemorate this year's World AIDS Day, UNAIDS is highlighting the urgent need to end the inequalities that drive AIDS and other pandemics around the world. Without bold action against inequalities, the world risks missing the targets we set for ending AIDS by 2030, as well as a prolonged COVID pandemic and a spiraling social and economic crisis. On Monday, we launched a report that reflects a stark warning. We are not yet acting fast enough to stop the pandemic. AIDS remains a pandemic, and only by moving faster to end inequalities that drive it can we overcome it. Our analysis shows that if we continue as we are, not even slacking, but just continue maintaining the services as they are today, and don't make steps to speed up access and close inequalities in the response, the world could face 7.7 million deaths over the next 10 years. That's a lot. But just doing more of the same, we still risk worsening this crisis. Where leaders, though, are acting boldly and together, bringing together cutting-edge science, delivering services that meet all people's needs, protecting human rights, and sustaining adequate financing, AIDS-related deaths and new infections are becoming rare. That's the good news. But this is only the case in some places and for some people. It's not across the world. Globally, the curves are not bending fast enough to stop the pandemic. Last year, our data showed 1.5 million new HIV infections and also rising rates in some countries. So moving in the wrong direction. Nearly 700,000 people died from AIDS last year. And this when we have the tools to prevent every single new infection, every single death. So then we see that infections are following fault lines of inequality. 6 in 7 new HIV infections among adolescents in sub-Saharan Africa are among girls. We are failing our girls. Gay men and other men who have sex with men, sex workers, and people who inject drugs face 25 to 35 times greater HIV risk worldwide. So inequalities drive the pandemic. Progress in AIDS, which was already off track, is now under even greater strain as the COVID crisis continues to rage, disrupting HIV prevention and treatment services, disrupting schooling, violence prevention programs, and more. The jury is still out. We're already seeing some indicators, proxy indicators, that we're going to see more new infections and more deaths in years to come. Through fighting the AIDS pandemic, we have learned a lot about what we need more of for AIDS and also for other pandemics. That's the other good news. We know what we need to do. We urgently need sufficient community-led and community-based infrastructure as part of a strong public health system, underpinned by robust civil society accountability. It's beginning to happen, but not fast enough, not everywhere, to support and invest in community-led services and to build the community-led infrastructure around the public health system. We need policies to ensure fair and affordable access to science. Again, a mixed picture. We're seeing that the world is making very slow progress on COVID because of a failure to make the vaccine accessible equitably. But even for us in HIV, there are new and exciting treatments that are coming on board onto the market. We need to see those move fast to reach everybody who needs them, like the long-acting antiretrovirals or long-acting prevention tools. This could be the game changer for young girls, for young women. So the work is there to be done. We need to protect our health workers and expand their numbers to meet our urgent needs. Friends, it is so sad to hear that even in this scarcity of COVID vaccines, that some countries are not able to roll out the vaccines that are available to them because of huge logistical problems within their health system, weaknesses of rolling it out. So, and that means not enough health workers, poorly paid health workers, not enough infrastructure around the clinics. So it means a lot that's not there, that needs to be put there. But first of all, the health workers themselves, to have enough of them, to have them well trained and well paid is critical for this pandemic, for COVID, and for future pandemics. And for that, we need sustainable financing that is equitable, that is supporting the health system in totality to serve everybody, not to discriminate some. So lastly, we must protect human rights and build trust in health systems. It was shocking to see how the people who have least rights were the ones targeted by the COVID pandemic and the public health measures. I recall a group of gay men who were quickly rounded up in Uganda in the early phase of the crisis and taken to prison, violated, and the case against them was that by being together in a house, so many of them, they were spreading COVID. I went to see the president to appeal for their release. And I ran out of arguments explaining that these were poor men without rights, hounded out of their homes and their communities, sheltering together. This was a shelter. And at some point I said to the president, I said, but Mr. President, you are saying these 30 so men are a risk to spread the virus because they are together. But down the road from your state house here, just less than a kilometer away, is a house with at least 50 women who live there. How come you're not arresting them? He said, which 50 women? I said, the nuns who are living there in the convent. He burst out laughing and he said, I get your point. We are going to do something. And eventually he released the young men. But you could see that public health measures did not come neutrally. They continued to be an obstacle for the people we care for. So again, the human rights struggle to insist that these are citizens with equal rights who should not be driven underground, persecuted, stigmatized, and driven away from the benefits of science. So it is these things that will ensure we close the inequality gaps and end AIDS. But they are too often applied unevenly, are underfunded, and are underappreciated. This brings me to the theme, End Stigma and Discrimination. The vision of the global HIV response is to achieve 3 zeros: 0 new infections, 0 related deaths, and 0 discrimination. Since 2016, more than 89 countries have reviewed and reformed punitive and discriminatory laws and policies. But I'm afraid the goal of 0 discrimination still eludes the world. In 25 of 36 countries with recent data, more than 50% of people aged between 15 and 49 displayed discriminatory attitudes towards people living with HIV, more than 50%. Stigma is real. Denial of health services to people living with HIV remains distressingly common. The prevalence and effects of discrimination are especially acute for members of key populations who face multiple intersecting forms of discrimination. In 2019, 1 in 3 women living with HIV reported to have experienced at least one form of discrimination related to their sexual and reproductive health in the previous 12 months. Punitive laws, the absence of enabling laws and policies, and inadequate access to justice contribute to the inequalities that undermine HIV responses. At least 92 countries criminalize HIV exposure, non-disclosure, and/or transmission, and 48 countries or territories continue to block people living with HIV from entry, stay, or residence. Among countries reporting data to UNAIDS in 2019, 32 criminalized and or prosecuted transgender persons. 69 criminalized same-sex sexual activity, 129 criminalized some aspect of sex work, and 111 criminalized the use of possession of drugs for personal use. The health and well-being of people living in prisons or other closed settings are routinely put at risk by punitive laws and policies, including denial of access to essential health services. If I may return to the discrimination that girls and women face, I think this is a gap area in our work. We do not look at it this deeply enough. We see now a spike in teenage pregnancies, realizing that what we always knew, the protection effect of school, however poor the school is, even unsafe as it is still safer than girls left to stay at home. We are realizing this, yet we do so little to use the school space as a place to protect adolescent girls. There is so much more about the early sexual debut and the early age at which girls give birth and the implications for these young mothers. Sometimes a lack of housing, the inability to access services because of social stigma, because of having to move away to hide from family, because of all these things. Looking at those social determinants is critical for us to be able to give them the services they need. I'm passionate about this question, having grown up in a village and seeing myself more as a survivor, because the girls I was born with, many of them fell victim to these kinds of this kind of discrimination, this kind of stigma, and so on. So I invite you all, Ireland, let's put more resources into addressing the higher vulnerability of adolescent girls and young women in Africa. And I know Ireland cares very much about this issue. Our collective strength to end AIDS is linked with the struggle to end human rights violations. So let's step it up on tackling human rights violations. This means indeed ending stigma, discrimination, and violence against women and girls, ending the marginalization and criminalization of key populations, sex workers or whatever name called, people who use drugs, gay, bisexual, and other men who have sex with men, and transgender people, prisoners, and other groups. I salute the frontline communities that have pioneered the approaches shown to be most effective, that are leading the charge for policy reform, that have driven the momentum for change, and that are pushing leaders to be bold on human rights. It's not easy. I know so many who are being deregistered all around the continent for the work that they do to defend human rights, but let's stand by them. World leaders must work together urgently to tackle the inequality challenges head on, especially that one on inequality in access to the tools of technology. On World AIDS Day, I listened to the words of Jonathan Montoya, a young man from Mexico who lives with HIV. He called for I quote him, a pandemic of courage. Amazing words. Let us be bold and courageous to create a just and equal society free from stigma and discrimination. That is what we need as we work to end inequalities, end AIDS, and prevent future pandemics. Thank you for listening to me. And back to you. Or was it Nicole?
I think it's me, Winnie. Yes, thank you very much. That was an absolutely fantastic keynote address, and just deep appreciation for your leadership and for you standing for the rights of women and girls and for a number of marginalized populations. Just the example you gave there of your recent representation to President Museveni shows the courage of your convictions. And you know, we need lots of people like you out there doing exactly that. And just to draw on your last words there, you know, to work towards a just and free society, free of stigma and discrimination. And given the focus on stigma and discrimination, just to say to the participants online, we've almost 100 participants online, and please feel free to pose questions. There is the Q&A box in the Zoom. We will be moving on to a panel discussion, and there will be opportunities for questions there as well. So please use the Q&A, and indeed for Winnie as well. So I am seeing one question in the Q&A, and that's from Breda Gahan, who is a stalwart advocate in addressing HIV. She works for Concern Worldwide in Ireland, and she talks about her concern about the lack of financing and support for networks of people living with HIV globally, especially in high impacted countries. And she's asking, what can UNAIDS do more to address this, given that social support is essential for people living with HIV? So maybe, Winnie, I'll hand back to you just to answer that question. And I think, you know, one of the key things you've talked about is the inequalities driving the pandemic, the huge challenge in addressing gender inequality in particular, and that we're failing our girls and women. And, you know, Michael spoke passionately about that over many, many years of his work on HIV. And I just wonder, what would your top priority be in addressing stigma that women and girls actually face? So what would your, you know, number one priority be? So maybe in answering those two questions, I'll hand back to you, Winnie, on that. Thank you.
Thank you. In my view, the most important thing we can do that will make a difference is to invest in social movements, in the communities that lead on the ground. You see, when we are consistent and we take a long-term perspective to build leadership at the ground level, that is how you start to break down stigma and discrimination. You have representatives of these communities able to stand up in hostile settings, to speak with a voice of that's authentic and legitimate. They've been trained and they know how to engage on the issues without being emotional or getting angry, but can explain themselves. You start to see communities begin to respect. But if we don't invest in them to become strong leaders and advocates of their own cause, nothing changes. They continue to be seen as the ugly part of society, the people who should be pushed away and not seen in public, all those ugly things that are done to them. So the first is to invest in them, and invest in them to lead their own services. Because when communities deliver services for themselves, they do it in dignity. They bring dignity and respect to those who are receiving services, and they do it with love for the people that they are working for. So that community-led services must find more money. We've put it there in the strategy. There's a target to achieve at least 30%. There's a target there of resources going directly to communities to lead their own services. I'm going to be championing this very hard with our donors and trying to find ways of setting up funding arrangements that can drive resources into their hands. And then, of course, to have huge movements on decriminalization. We have to join hands with other human rights defenders. Ours is a health approach, but we converge with those with other entry points to push back against criminalization. So that is how I see it. It is a real battle of human rights, and we have to apply all the smart ways that we can. Of course, we must use the instruments which we have. There's an African Charter on Human and People's Rights. There is much we can draw from there that would be helpful to this cause for key populations. We have the Protocol on the Rights of Women in Africa, and the African Union is now getting ready to adopt and ratify a protocol to end violence against women and girls. So these instruments are useful for pushing back on rights and challenging stigma and discrimination. Back to you.
Thanks, Winnie. That's fantastic. I mean, investing in social movements and at a community level and ensuring financing is hugely important. And we look forward to seeing further work through the UN system on that, because I think it is a really essential one. And the issue of then decriminalizing key populations and indeed moving forward in human rights, I know will resonate with a lot of our panelists who will be coming up very soon, and we'll be asking for their reflections on what they've heard from you. And I know for certain from our panelists that will resonate very closely. So listen, Winnie, I'm going to say a big thank you to you. I sincerely hope you can stay on a little longer with us. Appreciate if you cannot. But we were really, really delighted to have you, and especially given your Irishness coming through from your education and your work in Uganda. So really, really fantastic to have you with us today. And we obviously will continue to support your work in UNAIDS and your leadership there. So very many thanks. So I'll now hand over to Nadine, who's going to introduce a tribute video. Thanks, Nadine.
Thank you, Nicola, and thank you so much, Winnie. You're leaving me very much with, your words are resonating, a pandemic of courage, to be involved in a pandemic of courage. So thank you for that. Thank you. Looking at courage and looking to young people for inspiration and courage, which was always something that Father Michael was extremely passionate about. We're delighted to share with you now an inspiring music video that was created specially for this event. Those of you who were here with us last year will remember this impactful video. 42 young people aged 18 to 24 years old from Zimbabwe, the Jandiri Youth Choir, and a choir in Kildare, in County Kildare in Ireland, the Suso Youth Choir, worked together for 4 weeks in December to produce this video. They're singing a song called Choose to Dance, an original, wonderful song by Suso choir director and musician Emer Crehen, a good friend of mine. Michael, in December, watched this video over again and again. He absolutely loved the energy, the creativity, the passion, and he always spoke about the hope that young people were able to give all of us. So inviting you all to enjoy this video, and also to take the moment, if you can, stand up from your computer screens and move your body and just enjoy the music while we have that. Thank you.
Learn to see in the dark. Open your heart. What do you stand for? you don't know what you stand for, how can I find you? We change the rules of the game, things will never be the same. I'm so glad to know your name.
And you can start with your heart, where you're at. Can't you feel this connection?
Wow, just as powerful every time I hear that incredible video. And I see all of the chat going crazy with, you know, beautiful goosebumps, hope for the future. And that was Michael's thought exactly. And, you know, that beautiful song, life is much better when we choose to dance, you know, dance in all different kinds of ways. So beautiful. Thank you, Jandiri. Thank you, Emer and the Suso Choir. Okay, so after that incredible moment, and hopefully everybody was moving a little bit, we're delighted to move to our panel. We have a panel of 3 incredible speakers. I'm delighted to introduce them to you. Professor Sheila Tlou is absolutely no stranger to Ireland or to this event. She is co-chair of the Global HIV Prevention Network. She is a special ambassador to the African Leaders Malaria Alliance, champion of the Nursing Now Challenge, trustee to the board of the Florence Nightingale Foundation, and advisory board member for the Harvard Global Nursing Leadership Program. She is former UNAIDS Regional Director and former Minister of Health of Botswana, where she led a comprehensive HIV/AIDS program that is still a model in Africa today. She's also Professor Emerita of the University of Botswana and former director of the WHO Collaborating Centre for Nursing and Midwifery Development in Primary Health Care. Welcome, Professor Tlou. You're so welcome. We're delighted to have you back in Ireland today. Welcome, welcome. Joining Professor Tlou on the panel, we have the wonderful Ailbhe Smyth. Known to many of us here, she's a long-time campaigner on feminist, LGBTI+ issues and socialist issues. She's the founding head of Women's Studies and at University College Dublin. She is published widely on feminism, politics and culture. She chaired the National Lesbian and Gay Federation for several years, and she's a board member of Women's Aid and also of Action Aid, as well as being a co-founder and convener of the Coalition to Repeal the 8th Amendment. Ailbhe was named as one of Times Magazine's 100 most influential people in 2019 for her work on the 8th Amendment. She was a strategic executive member of the Yes Equality, the Equal Marriage campaign in 2005, and we know her well for fighting for women's right to choose since the 1980s. So we're delighted that you are with us today, Ailbhe. Thank you for joining us. And lastly, we have the most wonderful Liz Martin. She is a HIV activist. She is an author of a wonderful book called Still Standing, an Irish woman's story of HIV and hope. Liz is a mother of 4, and she's been living openly with HIV for the past 30 years. And you will hear from Liz that during this time, she has worked tirelessly, challenging HIV-related stigma and discrimination across the country. Today, she continues to raise awareness in all of the communities where she works and bringing hope to others who feel that they have no voice. And Liz currently also works in the homeless service in Ireland. So Liz, we're absolutely honored to have you. You're all very, very welcome. And Nicola.
Thanks, Nadine, for the wonderful introduction to Sheila, Ailbhe and Liz. And I'm going to turn to each of you in turn. I'll start with you, Sheila, and then bring in Ailbhe and Liz, and just to get your initial reflections on what you've heard from Winnie, the head of UNAIDS, and just to reflect back to participants what really resonated with you most. And before I hand over to Sheila, I'm just going to say to participants, please use the Q&A function. I have some questions for the panelists, but really it's up to you to engage, and it's a real opportunity to ask questions. So please do use the Q&A, and I'll reserve my questions and prioritize yours as we go through the panel discussion. So we have about 30 minutes. So I'm going to hand over to you first, Sheila, for your reflections. Thank you. Sheila, can you hear us? I'm not sure if your microphone is on. I can't hear you. Okay, maybe Sheila, what we'll do is I'll move to Ailbhe then first, and I'll come back around to you, and hopefully at that time we'll have your microphone fixed. So Ailbhe, over to you first. Thanks a million.
Thank you very much, Nicola, and hello everybody. Can I just say first of all that I feel really honoured to be on the panel today, part of this wonderful gathering not least because, of course, it's commemorating and in memory of Father Michael Kelly, who was such a passionate worker and advocate on HIV and AIDS. But of course, he won my heart when I realised what an ardent feminist he was. And we don't see the like of him that often. So I do particularly want to say that I really value being here. And also, I want to say a special thank you to HIV Ireland for the Glow Red campaign on World AIDS Day, which I thought was absolutely wonderful and which is very much about in a public way, combating the stigma, lighting our buildings up in bright red, glowing neon at night. That's what we need. It's getting out there with that incredibly positive. I tried to wear the reddest jumper I had today because I think that actually we do need to do that. We need to push out there. And before I just go on to my reflections, to say to people here, I think probably a lot of people know, but I have never worked in the area of HIV and AIDS. So I've learned a great deal already today, and listening, of course, to the ever wonderful Winnie, you can't not be informed and have your understanding really enriched. And so my comments are, very much coming from a learning perspective, but also, I suppose, in a way, drawing on my own understanding, observation, and experience of stigma in my own life in one way and another, not least coming out as lesbian a very long time ago, and also actually being a pro-choice activist, which in Ireland in the late 70s and 80s, you didn't get any brownie points for that, whatever you might get now. But I just wanted to sort of put that little piece there. What really struck me about Winnie's speech to us is, first of all, the great heart and the great wisdom that she has. But that phrase that she used about women and girls being on the fault lines, we are the fault lines of inequality. And acknowledging and recognizing, as I think everybody here would agree and that we need to do, that fully working on that fault line, confronting it, grappling with it, looking at how it plays out in different parts of the world. And of course, particularly in Africa, when we're talking about HIV and AIDS, that is something that we absolutely need to do and we must do. And really, I suppose, throughout my activist life, which now spans something appalling like 45 years, it has been always a struggle to try to move that understanding of women and girls, our lives, our needs, our rights, our entitlements, and how we are pushed back and discriminated against in a myriad different ways. That has been a struggle for a very long time. And what saddens me, of course, in one sense, is that it is still a struggle. And when you look up close at what is happening to women and girls this was a tweet that I think the great Breda Gann sent out there the other day. When you look at what happens with regard to HIV and AIDS in West and Central Africa to women, where something like 74% of new infections in that part of the world are in the age group 15 to 24, and they're young women. I mean, that is an absolutely appalling statistic, and it is a terrible indictment of how and what and who we are in the rest of the world. I hope in some way, although I am not that optimistic, I hope in some way that COVID and an understanding of that may have improved our sense of the need for global solidarity. But just right now, because that is certainly what we need if we're to reach the 3 zeros that Winnie talks about, but just right now I'm not seeing that with the deeply inequitable use and spread of the COVID vaccines. but at the same time, I think that we need to keep putting out figures of that kind. And even here in Ireland, as Liz, I'm so incredibly pleased and honoured to be on a platform with Liz, because women in this country, I think you're the very rare woman who speaks out about living with HIV in this country and who lives your life. And I think that takes a great deal of courage, and my hat is absolutely off to you, because we know how important it is for people to speak up and for there to be a human face on all we know. The last point I would make, because perhaps, Nicola, you can be waving your hand at me if you want me to stop immediately, but the other point, I suppose, that I wanted to make there, it is so important for women to stand up, because the situation for women, as Winnie was pointing out, and girls, is so grave. It is very grave in parts of the world that are far away from us, but we are nonetheless closely connected, and we should care. We should mind. That should matter hugely to us. But the point that she also touched on, which is that there is often a double or even a triple or quadruple whammy for girls and young women and women living with HIV or who contract HIV, because of the various ways in which our lives as women are not at all equal, in which there are big power differentials, big economic differentials. And I'm thinking of all of the different kinds of intersectionalities that make that difference in our lives, and that we see here in Ireland as well. Let's not forget that in Ireland, of new infections, I think in a couple of years ago, 21% were of women. That is not a negligible figure. It is one that we need to think about. But I did particularly just want to point to the ways in which misogyny, as well as homophobia, transphobia, ableism, social class, all of those factors, and obviously racism, all of those factors really can interact in a life and mean that your experience of living with HIV will be very much more difficult. And I hope that when we saw how COVID exacerbated inequalities, I hope that we have some understanding of that and that it can be globally applied to our understanding of HIV and AIDS and how that terrible pandemic can be ended by 2030. I think I'll just finish up there for the moment, at least, Nicola, if
That's super, Ailbhe. Thank you so much. I mean, really important points that you've made there, and really drawing on the vulnerability of women and girls and the exposure of women and girls to such high levels of discrimination and indeed other marginalised populations. And look, you really spoke to Liz as well in terms, and it's wonderful to meet you, Liz, virtually. I haven't met you personally, but wonderful to meet you virtually, and fantastic to have you on this panel. I think it was a number of years ago when I think, Ailbhe, you were on the panel previously, and we were talking about the need for women's voices to be heard more. So fantastic to have you. So Liz, would you like to come in just with some initial reflections, and then we'll go back around with more questions, but over to you for initial reflections. Thanks a million.
Thank you, Nicola. It's so wonderful to be here today. I'm so pleased, and the speakers have been absolutely fantastic. I've never got to meet Father Michael, but he sounds an absolutely amazing man. I'm so sad that I missed the opportunity. He seems like a right storm blazer. I guess Winnie's address there, what did come home for me was the importance of reaching out to young people, particularly young women, and how important it is to get the message across. Stigma is so entrenched, and self-stigma is absolutely soul destroying. It exasperates people. I know she spoke about the fault lines on inequalities, and I definitely feel that I was there when I was at a very young age, living in Ireland, in the west of Ireland. I was 24 when I was diagnosed, and at the time I had 4 small children with nowhere to go and nowhere to turn. I had gone into the GP and asked him to do a test, and he said, "Sure, what would you want one of those for?" You know, I said, "Well, I have been in a relationship, and I do feel that I could have put myself at risk." So he agreed to do the test, and it was 2-3 weeks later before I got the results. So walking into the GP's office, it was almost like I had heard some words outside, so it was almost, for me, it was a certainty that yes, this result was going to come back positive. Yeah, I had always asked him to share and to be honest with me about like any treatments that I may receive. I have experienced huge discrimination myself. When I walked into the hospital to see the professor with a list of questions, and I got to the last question, and I said, "Well, what is the likelihood of me developing AIDS?" And his answer was, "Well, I'll put it to you like this, you're dying." So the words just resounded in my head. I never remember getting home after hearing the news. And there was so little information out there. There was nothing, you know, there was no leaflets. You know, I was actually reading a book from America, and it was grim. And a friend of mine came in and she said, "Well, what are you doing reading this?" You know? So she took the book away because she didn't want me reading it. You know, like there was no hope. It was a life sentence to be handed this, you know. So like, I'm positive 30 years now, and I have 4 grown-ups, and I have 2 grandchildren, you know, and things have changed so much in that time. But for me, back then, 30 years ago, it was something that I had to stand up or run away and hide, you know, or go to a different town, because the witch hunt had already began. And I felt, well, I don't want to move, you know, again. I want to like challenge the stigma. It's the only way that I'm going to be able to live. Like, all I wanted to do was to live in peace, you know, and raise my family. But I wasn't allowed to do that at the time. I had people shouting at me on the street. Now, I don't want my children playing with your children. There's bad blood in your family. I had a woman walk into the school and ask questions about my children, and to the board of education got involved, the insurance company got involved. You know, like it really, really was bad. And it's hard to believe, like, that's 1991. But yeah, at that time, like, condoms were illegal. You couldn't buy condoms in Ireland. It was illegal to be gay. You know, it wasn't legalized until 1993. And things was just so bad. So, like, well, when I hear Winnie today talk about the experience of young women, it almost transports me back to then, to how I felt as a young woman, and how I was discriminated against. And I totally relate to the women that she's talking about today, and the inequalities that they experience. It's so important. Like, when Father Michael came out and he started talking about this, you know, the social vaccine to prevent and address HIV, AIDS. education is the only way, I feel, that we're going to make a difference. If we can't get the message out and we're not able to talk to the young people, we're not going to be able to change things, and we're not going to make a difference. Like, even today in Ireland, I am one of the very few women that speaks out about living with HIV. And, you know, I have friends all around the country, and I have people that still live in silence, that are not able to talk about what it's like living with this, you know, both male and female, you know, people that haven't been able to share it with their friends, their family, and are living in silence every day. Now, like, I choose to speak out, but like, having that inside is such a huge, it's a big bag of luggage, you know, getting hauled around. It's a heavy load to carry, not being able to share this, you know. I've worked in homeless services in Dublin for the last 15 years. And yes, I do meet people that are positive. And the one thing that does come home is, you know, that drop-in centre of Open Heart House is no longer available to people, you know, for that warm cup of tea, that chat, that little meal. Like, people are out there and they're walking the streets in Dublin. And I know HIV Ireland do a tremendous job. They do a great job. And Sexual Health West, without Sexual Health West, I'm not so certain I would still be here. I certainly wouldn't be as strong as I am now, and I'm such a strong advocate. Like, when I walked into a phone box to ring their helpline in 1991, it was a friendly voice on the end of the line that was keeping me going. I did not even know what question to ask, or what it was I was supposed to say, or what I was supposed to know. But to have that service, community services are so important to people with HIV. And now we have a new pandemic, like COVID. So for people that are HIV positive and that can't talk about living with HIV, like, to have the added stress of living in isolation with the constant lockdowns of COVID, it's so isolating. You know, people's mental health are suffering out there. You know, they need these services, the community services, to be able to, you know, to talk, because sometimes these are the only people that they can talk to, are the people that are working in these services. You know, so it's really important to get the message out to young people, and to have places for people to go that they can drop in and have chats, you know. So this week, it's been a busy week. I am part of the Living exhibition in CHQ, and it was wonderful. It was a great little treat to be able to go down and have the makeup done, and I'm feeling like such a bit of fuss, you know. And there's a portraits down there in the hall, and they're all spectacular. If anyone wants to drop in. You know, they did present me with a lovely portrait when I was leaving, and my son says, "Mom," he says, "it looks like you're looking up to heaven," you know. And I said, "Well," I said, "I might be looking up to heaven, but at the moment I'm very busy living." So it's important to keep things positive, and to offer each other support, and above all, like, have the love and have the compassion. That Father Michael, you know, was so, like, so strong. He had such strength as a person, you know, to be able to give that. So to all of you today, and all the tremendous work that you do across the globe, I love all of you, and thank you for everything that you do.
Liz, thanks a million for that. That's incredibly powerful. And I hope you can take a minute to look at some of the comments coming in from colleagues, acknowledging your tremendous courage and, you know, what you've come through, your own isolation, and, you know, the discrimination that you faced those many years ago. and still many are facing it. And it's a bit going, you know, back to what Ailbhe was saying, that it's it's really a shame that it's still a huge struggle for women and girls. It's still a huge struggle for people living with HIV to be open, and it's incredible in this day and age. But we need to hear stories like yours and the lived experience from people like you, because that really gives heart to a lot of people who are still in the dark, and as you said, who still can't come out and actually talk about their status to their loved ones, to their communities. So yeah, real inspiration there, Liz. Thank you so much. Everybody, I'm just going to remind you about the Q&A function if there's any questions. And now I'm going to go over and see if we can get our woman in Botswana to come in. Sheila, can we hear you at all? Can you try your microphone?
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you. Great.
You can hear me. I had to change laptops because the one that we did the pre-test on said to me, I can't recognize your microphone. It was like, what? So anyway, I'm glad my daughter is here, so she's been able to help me. But it's a smaller laptop. But if you can see me and if you can hear me, I am fine. And let me first, acknowledge our minister for being with us, today, and also, of course, my executive director, Winnie Byanyima, who has really been with us, and all of you. I mean, Nicole and Nadine, I've been with you forever with this, the Father Michael Kelly lecture, and indeed, I was hoping that I would be in Ireland for it. But in memory of that, I'm wearing my green stuff. What can I say? And simply I can say to everybody who's listening, who's participating in Ireland, Dies Marigoth. Yeah, I'm hoping I've said it right. I know I have. And Liz and my colleague Ailbhe, I listened to you because I had to keep the other one on, and those have been really very inspiring messages. For me, as Dr. Byanyima said, I'm also Irish. I'm also, I consider myself an Irish girl, having been taught by Irish nuns and priests. In fact, at one point I was going to be a nun. That's a long story. I'll tell you one day when we come for another Professor Michael Kelly lecture. But really, for me, it's paying tribute to somebody that I saw as my mentor, who has really been with me throughout. And even when I was minister, I would actually consult him because, being a Catholic, sometimes you are confounded as a decision maker. You are confounded with issues that your pastor or priest will say, no, you can't do that. Yet you are saying, but I am not a moral reference. I am a scientific reference. And this is what the science is saying. So that I found myself quite a lot in conflict with quite a few of my priests. And I say to them, look, I am a Catholic who has a conscience, who is doing research. And this is the only way I can go. So until you come with another way, I can deal with, issues of girl-child, issues of, premarital sex. I have no other way. So, but Professor Michael Kelly, I have had a chance to visit him in Zambia because, I had read one of his real quotations that I like, where he said, a thick cloud of ignorance surrounds the presence of disease within universities, amply lined with layers of secrecy, silence, denial, and fear of stigma and discrimination. That rang a bell with me because at that time, I was a professor at the university. And so, and like him, I really believed that education was the only vaccine that would get us out. And the only vaccine that will make sure that we get rid of stigma and discrimination. And I'd always say to him, how come you started so late? Because, I started, because of my background on gender issues, generally, immediately we had the first case in 1985 in Botswana. I knew that women and girls were in for it. that we were going to really be discriminated. We are going to have the impact of the epidemic. And indeed, we may even be the last to access whatever vaccines or ARVs that would be put forth. So I knew, like him, that one of the things that we need to do is to educate the girl child, keep the girl child in school and all that. And so I had to go to him to say, look, I need to do something at the university. But right now, I seem to be alone. There was still that denial, and there was still that fear, that stigma of anybody who wanted to come out. So it just so happened that in 1988, African women, we got together and formed the Society for Women in AIDS in Africa. And I formed the counterpart in 1990, Society for Women in Africa, Botswana chapter. And it was interesting how the very first meeting that I called, there were more than 300 women at the university coming to really hear for themselves and all that. And slowly, some would then be coming to say, I'm living with HIV, I'm living with HIV. But it was still like hush, hush, secret. So I depended therefore on Father Michael Kelly. And with him, I was able to come up with a policy on HIV and AIDS in Botswana. One of the first for the University of Botswana. One of the first African countries to actually have a policy on HIV and AIDS, including a policy on sexual harassment and really gender relations, because of that factor that we knew that women were more likely to be impacted. So it's really great that after that, to me, it was then that the launching pad. I was able to write on HIV/AIDS issues among women, and in Beijing, my papers were some of the first, were the only ones there, because at that time in the West, HIV was among homosexuals, so to speak. So it was like, yeah, but what about you in Africa? I said, no, for us, the gender issues in Africa are about our relations, our status in society, and how we are viewed. Everything, the social determinants of health. So I'm glad that Winnie Byanyima talked about the social determinants of health, because in the ultimate, we do, if we are going to get rid of this epidemic, we do have to have a gendered lens, a lens that is the human rights of people in all that. So I'm proud to be able to say that when I became minister, to me, there was the gender aspect, and I knew that I had to ensure that women don't fear anything. There is education at schools. So I partnered with the Ministry of Education to Professor Michael Kelly's, he was really glad that we are working with the Ministry of Education to ensure that girls and boys are educated, girls are kept at school, and we are lucky enough to have a country where education was free all the way to post-university level. But we then needed comprehensive sexuality education to ensure that those girls stay in school, and when they're in there, they are taught and mentored to have paying jobs so that they can be independent and not have to be dependent on somebody in such a way that you can't even then negotiate safer sex, let alone refuse unsafe sex. So that was great. But the great part on stigma and discrimination, getting rid of it, had to now be looked at in terms of mother-to-child transmission. And when I became minister, we knew through the teachings of Michael Kelly that we need to start at community level. That any data, any science that we are doing, we should put in the lived experiences of communities. So that, and that's still the same thing that we are doing. We were able to then look at mothers-in-law. They are the ones who are supposed to support women if they're not breastfeeding. We had to look at grandparents. We had to look at husbands and all that. And guess what? After we were able to really get all discrimination and stigma brought down at village level, we were able to launch that program to prevent mother-to-child transmission. And within 4 years, Botswana had brought down the rate of mother-to-child transmission from 29% to 8% within 4 years. And I'm seeing that trajectory still on, in that Botswana yesterday was actually given the silver whatever in terms of one of the first few countries to be able to eliminate mother-to-child transmission. So that became a trajectory. And the great part was when all this was happening, I would phone Professor Michael Kelly, tell him what was happening. You know, when I did youth-friendly services, condoms in prison, I would say, listen, I'm doing that. I'm practicing evidence-based Catholicism. And he used to laugh at that, evidence-based Catholicism. But you know, that really shows that we still need to do that based on data and ensure that we have that inequality taken care of. So my colleagues have talked about the COVID pandemic, and I agree with them in everything. And especially because in Africa, lockdowns meant you were locked down with somebody who was going to violate you. And that then predisposed us to HIV infection and really lack of human rights protection. So I'll let me stop there. Yeah, for more answers. Thank you.
Sheila, that's absolutely fantastic. And thanks a million for all of that. And I think you brought in a lot of what Michael stood for. You know, there's a comment there that he believed in science and responsibility, and that is very true. So well done, you, and for all your leadership and the work that you've done in Botswana. You know, the HIV prevention program that you led when you were the minister there was a model, and many people, including myself, went to learn from what Botswana was doing. So well done, you. We're actually running quite short of time. So what I'm going to do is go backwards around. So I'll go to you first, Sheila, then to Liz and Ailbhe. And can you just give one core piece of wisdom or one core message for all our participants today? And remembering the theme of our lecture is stigma and discrimination. So one core message for everybody to take away from our session today. So over to you, Sheila, first.
Yes, for me, the core message for everybody. Remember, World AIDS Day message is also end inequalities. And now we are saying, let's end stigma and discrimination. It's really to say, look, health is made in the home and in the community. Hospitals are for repairs. Let's ensure that we empower communities. We empower civil society to be able to do the lived experiences of men and women at community level and use that data to be able to feed onto our policymakers so that they do evidence-based and evidence-informed decision-making. So that's really what I'll end up with. And to simply say that Professor Michael Kelly was something else, and I know he is resting in peace. He's left a legacy in some of us.
Thank you, Sheila. That's super. So empower communities and evidence-based decision-making, two really core messages. So Liz, over to you. Liz, can you hear me? Can you come in with the key message?
Hi. Yes, I believe it's important for young people to have hope. You know, there is help out there in the communities, and it's important for the message to get out and to keep the education flowing, to inform young people to make conscious decisions, and to give the power back to people so they can feel that to go forward with their lives, you know. And it's just like young people, it's important to get the message to them and to keep the community services going. So important. Yeah.
Liz, thanks a million, and really coming back to that choir as well. Fantastic young people there speaking out through music and dance, and yeah, totally an excellent message there. And then Ailbhe, over to you.
Well, I think that, you know, since we're talking about trying to end stigma, and I think it's very, very key that we have an understanding of how stigma works and what it is and where it comes from and how it becomes internalized. It always comes from shame and fear and shame about sex, about weakness of any kind, about a deficit, and of course fear of our own mortality. And we know that can absolutely erode people and their sense of confidence, because what in effect it does, and what we do when we stigmatize groups and individuals, is we make them other. We say, you're different, you're other. We marginalize and we silence. I think we've all spoken about that silencing, and we deny voice and power. And I think really that comes across very strongly, that giving voice and power to those who have been denied it through stigma is absolutely crucial. So I would come back to Winnie's point, that investing in social movements in communities, which is about giving people voice, and which is also about saying that those who are living with HIV and who are living with HIV are the people who should be leading the charge. They're the ones who know what needs to be done and what needs to be overcome in order for the othering and the marginalization to stop. And of course, I think that the music is so much about voice for young people, but also let's bear in mind that there are older people who have been living with HIV for a very long time, and that they should be able to enjoy their lives and express themselves freely.
Ailbhe, thanks a million. That's fantastic, giving voice and power, and it really reflects what Michael said many years ago, listening courageously to women and their experience of stigma and discrimination, which Liz amplified today. So listen, they're incredibly good messages. Can I just say enormous gratitude to the three of you. You've been fantastic panelists, and I know that everybody online will have benefited from listening to your life experience, your words of wisdom, and your excellent core messages at the end. So Muila Buikas to all of you. Over to you, Nadine, now for final reflections. Thanks a million.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. I just love to send everybody some love here on the panel. Father Michael was big into love, so sending you all some love and feeling extremely inspired. Thank you to each and every one of you. And we would love to, I'm so happy to be able to welcome Ruairi de Burka to just say a few words. He's the Director General of the Department of Foreign Affairs, Development Cooperation and Africa Division. No stranger to this event. Ruairi, we would love to hear just some reflections on the panel. And we're very excited because you're going to be launching 2 new initiatives, 2 new projects we're going to share with everybody today. So over to you, Ruairi.
No, thanks, Nadine, and thanks to you and Nikki for stepping in and doing such a great job. Look, I think an awful lot of really, really profound and insightful things have been said. And I just want to maybe just capture, for me, a few things around that, just to be amplify what we've heard from Liz and from Ailbhe, from Sheila and from Winnie. I think it's great that it's been primarily female voices today, because so much about the discussion has been, around the importance of reaching girls, and I'm very conscious, that today is about AIDS, but it's with the shadow, as the minister said, of the other pandemic, which is exacerbating the challenges of people living with HIV, but it also brings a new risk, particularly for girls, and particularly for girls in developing contexts, but not exclusively. Too many girls are not in school at the moment, and too many girls aren't going to go back to school. Too many girls are getting married too young, at ages that would be criminal in this country. And are losing agency over their lives, and that puts them at risk. And I think, that's a sobering moment. And I think it points to just thinking about the work that I do with the assistance of people like Nicola and many others, including many partners around this call as well, and UNAIDS. But we won't beat AIDS if we only think about it as a medical problem. It's a social issue. And we beat AIDS by thinking about, we beat COVID by thinking about it in its broadest context. And that's about, how we invest in public health. And that question of trust that came up, I think, in many ways, trust in public health, but trust in ourselves to deal with stigma, trust in ourselves to call out things. I love that phrase that Sheila used, that she attributed to Father Michael, of evidence-based Catholicism. Because that reminded me of some of the decommissioning of our mindsets that we all need to do when we encounter new challenges. The cultural things we grew up with, maybe religious things, the careless conversations that our friends have with us around questions, and also as those of us who are lucky enough to be able to engage with, create or influence policy, how we have to deconstruct our own thinking if we're to get the right policy responses moving forward. So I think there's a lot in what was said there, and an element of it came through all of the presentations, and I really thought that thread around, investing in community or investing in social movements was really critical, because ultimately we all live in our communities, whatever they are, whether they're the neighborhoods we live in, whether they're the people that we network with, whether they're the social services that we have to engage with or not engage with, because community can be a negative thing as well. And if we don't engage there, I think there's something really important. The rights-based approach came through a lot as well. And hope, Liz talked about hope, and ultimately, it's really clear that without hope, we don't change things. And, Martin Luther King, I think it was, had said that, we must accept finite disappointment, but we can never lose infinite hope. And I think, there's been a lot of disappointments in the journey against HIV and AIDS. Also, there's been, at least some of those disappointments have been finite, they've come to an end. The medicine has changed, thank God. There are in some places many fewer infections, but there's also, I think, the realization that it is ultimately a disease which attacks all of the other injustices in our societies. And it's no accident that the disease remains at epidemic proportions in places like Southern Africa, notwithstanding the visionary efforts of people like Father Michael and people like Sheila. I know it's so good to see what's happened in Botswana over the last 20 years, but it's also a reminder that there's so much more to do. And I'm conscious here at home too, that unfortunately, the numbers of those infected has gone up in recent years. And that points to, a continuing and enduring challenge for all of us with voice and agency in this. And, it was so good to hear testimony today rooted in many different personal experiences. And I think that courage and those individual stories, are what helps us get that engaged and take things forward. And in many ways, that's how Father Michael, lived his life, and how he gave us the inspiration. He didn't say, no, I'm one thing and I can only be that, or he didn't stop to challenge himself and others. And I think that was really, really special and visionary. And he linked education with his work on HIV for a long time and educated all of us. And he's left a legacy that we want to honour, particularly as from an Irish Aid perspective, we want to continue being a strong partner, in that, I suppose, journey to get to the 3 zeros that Winnie mentioned. And, I hope that by the time HIV and AIDS reaches its unfortunate 50th birthday, we will be able to mark the success in ending the epidemic. And so keeping Father Michael's legacy alive and with us, I think, is really important as we continue the discussion as we move forward. And that's why, it's really, really nice to know that the Irish Global Health Network have put together some pieces of work that capture the heart of Father Michael's lectures and the essence, I think, of this collaborative lecture series, which we've been holding for about 15 years. And we've heard from all, from Winnie, Ailbhe, Liz and Sheila today, the power of that collaboration, in word and in deed today. So together with the Irish Aid, with the Irish Global Health Network, we are launching a new publication, which will be an update of the HIV and AIDS, A Deep Human Concern, to include all of Father Michael's lectures from 2006 to 2020. All of his lectures together in one publication will reveal, I think, what we all know to be the enormous depth of his work and his thinking around HIV and AIDS. And I think, from my perspective, it's also a lovely sort of recognition of the collaboration that we as a department enjoyed with Father Michael, which went on for such a long time. And unfortunately, and I'm very conscious we're here with Father Michael's family today, didn't go on for as long as we would have hoped. And we will all feel his loss as we move forward. I'd also like to draw attention to a podcast series which the Irish Global Health Network will shortly launch, which will include recordings of all Father Michael's lectures. The title of the podcast is From Zambia to Ireland, 15 Years of Insights on HIV and AIDS. And finally, just before I hand it back to Nadine and to Nikki, as Irish Aid, we will continue to work with the Irish Global Health Network to explore other ways to recognise the work of and pay tribute to individuals who advocate for the promotion of education and social justice in the area of HIV and AIDS internationally. And we hope to create a memoriam award in honour of Father Michael for those individuals who have demonstrated personal courage, selflessness and leadership in the fight against HIV and AIDS. And we will explore this more next year, and I think that's really important, going back to that point about community, going back to that point about hope. It's individuals in their communities who step up, work through that stigma, who create those lighthouses of hope, who become those storm blazers, to use the word that Liz gave us, in helping us get to those 3 zeros. And to each of them, we owe a big thanks, whether or not we give them an award. But, and just finally to say thank you to everybody involved here today. It's been a real pleasure to listen to you. And I'm saying that, I hope, on behalf of everybody who's been involved in the audience today. So thank you. And with that, back to you, Nadine and Nikki.
Rory, thanks a million for that and for joining us, and indeed your reflections, which were really excellent in feeding back in terms of the various messages and thoughts from our panelists, and really fantastic to see the publication and podcast on Father Michael. It was absolutely brilliant to see that, and I see there's a foreword in the publication from his dearest niece, Dorina O'Hagan, who's with us here today, so that's really excellent to bring the family. And Rory, also on the Memorial Award, that's really fantastic, so we look forward to that coming forward as well. Before I finish up, just to say to everybody that there is an evaluation form which has just popped up into the chat function. So we'd really like to know what you felt about today's session. I certainly felt it was absolutely fantastic, and big gratitude to all our speakers, to the Minister at the outset, to Winnie as the keynote speaker, and then to our panelists, to Ailbhe, to Sheila and to Liz, and then Rory for your final reflections. I said at the outset that Father Michael would love to have been here. I think he would have been incredibly proud of this year's lecture. And I think he has come through in all of the words and work that has been represented here today. And I think one of my recollections I said earlier was about Michael's powerful drive and advocacy to keep HIV on the political and the international agenda. And I think that has actually been achieved yet again here today with all of you and all of your words and all of the work that you have represented. And I think we all have a role to continue that, and we will continue his legacy. So really, really fantastic, and real gratitude to everybody today. So back to you, Nadine, for the final end of our lecture. Thanks a million.
Thank you, Nicola. Thank you, everybody. So we have something beautiful to share with you just to end this lecture. I can give you a clue to say it's musical. Before we close, I just want to say we could thank many people. Already, I hear the speakers have been thanked, and we're so grateful for all of you. And also, I would like to name and thank Megan, Ronan, Helen, Maisie, and Maria for your phenomenal work to put this together. We're closing the event today with a special memorial. Just to remember Father Michael, to celebrate him. We have a memorial page. If you haven't yet been able to share a tribute, please go on there and add your words. These words are being shared with the family, and they have great meaning. So the link will be in the chat for you. And we're going to leave the lecture with a song. It is a beautiful song, a rendition of a song called All My Tears that was performed during Father Michael's funeral that many of us were able to attend online last January. It's sang by a beautiful Zambian singer. She's a member of the local choir who sang during his funeral service. And in the words of Father Michael, may God bless and enlighten you, make you strong and keep you safe. On behalf of Nicola and I, thank you, and please enjoy this beautiful, beautiful song and some beautiful photographs of Father Michael's life.
When I die, don't cry for me. In my Father's arms I'll be. The wounds this world left on my soul will all be healed, and I'll be whole. Sun and moon will be replaced with the light of Jesus' face, and I will not be afraid, for my sake, my name. When I die, don't cry for me. In my Father's arms I'll be. The wounds this world left on my soul will all be healed, and I'll be whole. Sun and moon will be replaced with the light of Jesus' face, and I will not be ashamed, for my Savior knows my name. It won't matter where you bury me, I'll be home and I'll be free. It won't matter where I lay. All my tears will be washed away. It won't matter where you bury me. I'll be home and I'll be free. It won't matter where I lay. All my tears be washed away. Gold and silver blind the eye, temporary riches lie. Come and eat from heaven's store, come and drink and thirst no more. So weep not for me, my friends, when my life below does end. For my life belongs to Him who will raise the dead again. It won't matter where you bury me. I'll be home and I'll be
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Yes, thanks everybody from Addis, and just a fantastic tribute to our dearest Michael. Bye everyone.
Bye.